Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
I didn't notice the pattern at first. You never do. You just accept the new normal because marriage teaches you to adjust without keeping score. Laura said she wasn't sleeping, that the air felt too loud, that her chest tightened in the cereal aisle at Shaw's. She started having days where she'd go ghostly quiet at dinner and say, "I think I need to see someone," and I'd nod and say, "Of course," and take on the dishes, and quiz Ethan on algebra, and remind Grace not to leave her cheer bag by the back door. We've lived in Wellesley since 2014, old split level with a cedar that sheds on the gutters, the kind of neighborhood where everyone owns the good rakes and we pass them around like casseroles. We do the 4th of July parade, the farmers market on Saturdays, the endless chain of team emails. I coach Ethan's JV baseball when they're short a dad. I'm 46 and wear the same Red Sox cap I wore when we moved here. The brim is frayed and the B is sweat faded, and Laura always used to steal it when she wanted to make me crazy. This summer she stopped taking it, and I told myself that was growth. Mature married people don't tease, I thought. Mature married people manage. Her first appointment was on a Tuesday. Our car, a gray Highlander with the dent on the rear bumper that Ethan swears was already there, needed an inspection sticker. She asked if I could drop her at the clinic on Worcester Street, across from the bakery. "Just for an intake," she said. "I'll Uber home." I offered to wait. "That's okay," she said, "too fast. It might be a while." I watched her walk through the sliding doors, pale blue jacket pulled tight even though it was 70 degrees. We'd had a fight the night before, stupid, about whether we were overscheduling the kids, and her sudden quiet had felt like a verdict. So the words came easy, of course. "Take what you need." I did the inspection. I bought coffee. I checked my phone for emails. When I finally looked up, an hour had passed and I texted her, "All good." She wrote back, "Still waiting." "Don't worry. Thank you." We started to live by the waiting room. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. I'd drop her off, drive to Home Depot, pick up mulch, answer a client call leaning on a stack of pine 2x4s, then circle back and sit out front with the hazards on. Sometimes she would come out bleary-eyed, like she'd cried. Other times she'd be buoyant, pink in the cheeks. She'd thank me and put her hand on my arm and we'd drive home in comfortable silence. I don't know a better high than competent husbandry, the small tendernesses unnoticed by anyone else. I kept thinking that these were the things I would want someone to do for Ethan and Grace someday. Stay. Drive. Carry. In August she started saying doctor instead of therapist. She was specific on the language, doctor, as if the word alone earned her a more solid kind of care. "He's really good," she said. "He gets the physiological piece. Not just talk." She never said his name, and I didn't press. It felt prying, like asking to read someone's journal. I knew there was a behavioral health practice next door to a primary care clinic. I confused them all together in my head. I had a list of finals projects and budgets at work, and the worn comfort of the routine made me lazy. She would mention medications in vague terms, "He's thinking of something mild, propranolol maybe?" And I would nod like I understood. The day that split the summer from something else came near Labor Day. The waiting room was full enough that people were sitting on windowsills. A toddler pressed his mouth to the aquariums and left a wet ellipse. Laura had texted that the doctor was running behind. I'd come inside to bring her a tea, 2 Splendas, because the bakery across the street had messed up and given me a second cup. I told the receptionist I was just dropping off a drink for my wife, and she smiled and said, "Lucky," and then gave me the practice neutral that receptionists use when they're deciding if they should let you linger. I turned to leave when a man in a tie touched my shoulder. He had that tidy doctor look, pressed shirt, no coat, Boston College ring. He said, "Mr. Whitaker?" And I said yes. He glanced past me, at the hallway that led to the exam rooms, then back at the line at the front desk. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure," I said, and my first thought was they were going to tell me she was in crisis, that I should prepare to drive her to an ER. He led me to a small consult room the size of a closet. There was a plastic scale in the corner and a printout taped to the wall about shingles vaccines. He shut the door and lowered his voice like he was about to confess he'd ruined the end of a movie. "I'm confused," he said. Your wife isn't a patient here." I laughed because there was nothing else to do. "She's been coming twice a week all month," I said. "Always this office." "We've checked twice," he said. "We have no chart for her. We don't even take her insurance." He said he wasn't trying to violate any policies by talking to me, no diagnosis to disclose, he joked, badly, but that he felt concerned. "Sometimes," he said, "people sit in medical spaces for comfort. Sometimes they think they have an appointment when they don't." The more he talked, the more it sounded less like concern and more like indemnification. Like he wanted it on record he'd said something if something later went wrong. I told him there must be a mistake. Maybe they have a second location? Maybe she's in the behavioral health suite? He shook his head and said the suite was theirs too, just a different wing. "I can't discuss other tenants," he added quickly, rehearsed, "but if you're worried, talk to your wife." Which is the kind of advice that makes you feel both stupid and ungrateful. Talk to your wife. Hadn't that been the problem all along, that whatever words I put on the table were the wrong ones for whatever words she had in her head? I walked out of the consult room and the receptionist looked at me as if she'd seen this play before. Laura was in a chair by the window where the light hits like a hospital in winter. She saw the tea and smiled. Her phone was in her lap, screen down. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just waiting. You didn't have to come in." "They said they don't have you listed," I said. I tried to keep my voice easy, but my mouth went tinny. "Maybe it's under a different name?" She stood up too fast and the tea in her hand sloshed. "We'll talk in the car," she said. In the car her story came out in a rush, like blowing through a red light and then deciding to just keep going. She said she'd been embarrassed to admit she hadn't scheduled things correctly, that she'd spent time getting comfortable with the idea of care. She said she'd been warming up in the waiting room, reading pamphlets, letting herself imagine telling a stranger the truth. The word she used was acclimating. Acclimating to help. By the time we pulled onto our street, I was both relieved and annoyed, which is the tightrope fathers live on. "You could have told me," I said, reaching for a light tone. "We could have acclimated together." She put her hand over mine on the gear shift. "I know," she said. "I'm trying." The thing about small lies is that they're not heavy when you lift them alone. It's when someone else picks them up that they feel like lead. I tucked it away and decided to trust the story because I wanted to, because I didn't want to be the husband who polices and interrogates. When you've been married 20 years, you learn to decide what the two of you are going to believe. School started. Our mornings became choreography. I'd make lunches. Laura would manage forms, which she loved. She liked to read those mind-numbing district emails and highlight things like she was decoding. She handled the picture day sign-ups, the booster club fee, the Venmo for the team pizza. She was so competent it felt like the truest element of our marriage. If she had secrets, they lived around the edges of her competence. She still had appointments twice a week. I still drove. Sometimes she insisted she didn't need me and took the Highlander. Ethan started lifting with the football team at 6 a.m. to get stronger fast and acted like it was a personality. Grace developed an obsession with 6th grade council elections and began to make campaign posters for her friend Tessa. The house held all of it like a cupped hand. On Saturdays I mowed the same lines I've mowed for a decade, and when I finished, she'd come out in her flip-flops and say, "It looks like a baseball field," and I'd pretend it was the first time anyone had said that and not the 1000th. The second fracture came on a Thursday. Our office is in a converted mill building in Needham, been there since '98. Exposed brick, a coffee roaster downstairs. I run operations for a company that designs exhibits for museums, the kind of job that sounds sexier than it is until you learn I spend half my time negotiating shipping crates. Our tenant across the hall is a consulting firm that does organizational culture projects, which means no one can explain to their mothers what they do. I know two of them by name because we share a fridge, Claire with the dreadful metal straw she cleans obsessively, and a guy named Tom who wears Apple Watch bands that change with the seasons. That day, Tom was rolling a suitcase out of the conference room with an energy that made everyone in an open floor plan look up. We all know that gate, the airport gate in 45 minutes hustle. Claire followed with a tote bag full of chargers. Lydia's already in the Uber, she told him. She's freaking out about the hotel change. Tom forced a laugh. Who is the client again? The doctor guy? Kind of, Claire said. He insists we call him doctor. I didn't think anything of it until late afternoon, when Laura texted to say, "Doctor today. Running late. Can you handle dinner?" It snagged in my brain because we do so many small things on autopilot until one of them lines up with a pinprick of coincidence. Tom came back toward 4, suitcase lighter, a Dunkin' iced coffee in his hand, complaining to Claire that the doctor had insisted on changing his travel dates again. When was he out last? Claire asked. Tom scrolled his phone. Monday and Wednesday to Hartford. Today to Boston proper. It is maybe the most unromantic thing about infidelity that it almost always comes down to logistics. The timeline lined up too easily. Laura had been at the doctor Monday and Wednesday, and now again Thursday, and that doctor had moved around like a client with points to burn. Something sticky formed at the back of my throat. I tried to swallow it, failed. At home I asked Laura how the appointment went, and she told me, without any inflection I could detect, that he thought they were making real progress. We ate Trader Joe's orange chicken. Ethan left his plate in the sink. Grace created a paper mess for campaign slogans on my clean kitchen island. I told myself that if you stare at a coincidence long enough you can talk yourself into any shape. I pulled our visa statements the next morning on my work laptop. We're not the type of couple to hide money. We have separate credit cards and a shared checking account, but we've always treated it like a teamwork problem. Every year when we do the taxes, we joke about how I'd be the one to go to jail because I'm the one who insists on trying to do it myself with a spreadsheet. The chase took 15 minutes. The line items were ordinary: groceries, gas, school fees, and then not ordinary. A Marriott charge for room incidentals from the week before, tagged to a location near the Boston seaport. Another 2 weeks earlier. Different hotel, same neighborhood. The base charges had been paid by someone else, corporate, maybe, and we got the little add-ons, room service tip, a late checkout fee. If I'd found lipstick, I would have had something theatrical to do with my hands. But spreadsheets don't give you drama, they give you dates and numbers. The first date lined up with the day she told me she was staying late after an appointment because she wanted to take a walk. The second was a day she texted that she was going to check out the bookstore across the street. I stared at the screen until the browser timed out and the little spinning thing told me it was done waiting for me to do something. That night I didn't ask her. I want to admit that. I made tacos. I got Grace to brush her teeth without a fight. I managed Ethan's request to borrow the car on Saturday with dignity. We watched an episode of a show where all the couples are too pretty to be plausible. She leaned against me on the couch and I felt like the counterfeit of myself. Like one of those knockoff baseball jerseys you can't look at too closely or the seams betray you. When I finally broke, it wasn't because I planned it. It was because people like me always break under the small stuff. It was a Thursday. Laura had another doctor appointment. I'd finished a call and stopped at the bakery for almond croissants. I thought about setting one aside for her, the way I used to do when we both worked in the city and met for lunch on the common like people in a brochure. I waited at the curb outside the clinic and watched a man in a navy blazer wheel a suitcase down the sidewalk. His movements were familiar, the office hustle cadence. He spoke to a woman in a tailored dress I recognized from across our hall, Claire. She handed him a folder. He lifted a hand in a wave and crossed the street toward the seaport shuttle. I didn't know his name, but I knew his walk. A second later I saw Laura through the clinic glass, rise from a chair, pull on her jacket, and walk out not looking in my direction. She turned away from the car, toward the side street that leads to the hotels. I did not follow. I want credit for that, though I know it's a poor man's point tally. I texted, "I'm parked out front." She answered, "Running late, 20 more." I drove around the block and sat where I could see the seaport footbridge, the one we love, the one covered in locks that say things like J+K forever. The breeze lifted, late summer pretending to be fall, and the lockscape rattled like chimes. Maybe this is the gutless version of discovery. No scene. No confrontation under a street lamp. I sat and watched the bridge until I saw Laura again, 20 minutes later, walk out from under its shadow, hair windblown, cheeks bright. She got in the car and kissed me soft on the cheek. "Thank you," she said. "You're a saint." I drove us home like a driver who'd memorized a route and cannot allow for any new map. She selected a song on the radio we used to dance to in the kitchen. I turned it down. I don't know if that was the moment she knew, or if she'd known long before. The quiet in our car was not new, but it had more edges. If you want to know the exact thing that made it undeniable, it was a receipt. I was vacuuming the car because I needed control over something. I pulled the mats and worked deep under the seats and found the folded wedge of a bill printed on hotel paper, the paper so thick it makes you forgive the cost. It had been slipped into the back pocket of the passenger seat and fallen beneath. Billing to drive. R. Hargrove, one night at the harborfront, suite name South Tower, 2 meals from room service. Guest, L. Whitaker. I worked the paper flat on the kitchen counter with the palm of my hand like smoothing a map. My name was on the companion's line, blank, which felt like a mercy, like the hotel didn't want to weigh in on the specifics of a betrayal. I looked up Hargrove and found a LinkedIn page with a photo that looked like an alumnus who would always go to his reunions early. Organizational psychologist. Doctor. The office address matched the number across from mine. I didn't want to call him. I didn't want his voice in my ear. Instead, I did the oldest thing a person can do. I called my own father-in-law. Laura's parents live in Sudbury, a colonial with blue shutters that have faded to chalk. Her mother, Marianne, makes a green bean casserole every Thanksgiving so reliable we build the rest of our menu around it. Her father, Pete, has a voice like a baseball game turned low. They are the steady people I imagined for our old age. I called Pete because he is the least dramatic man alive. I said, "I need your help figuring out how to talk to Laura." And his silence was the kind that drives a wedge into decades. "Come by," he said finally. "Bring the kids." We told Ethan and Grace we were doing an early dinner with Nana and Papa. They both whined in their age-appropriate registers and then caved because we'd raised them, if nothing else, to be fundamentally decent. The drive to Sudbury felt like a corridor. Laura sat small in the passenger seat. As we pulled into the driveway she reached for my hand and said, "Smile." A reflex from 1,000 family entries. I couldn't. Inside the house smelled like lemon oil and something sweet. Marianne hugged each of us and called us by name like a radio host. Pete asked if I wanted a beer. I shook my head. "Let's talk," I said. I tried to do it in a way that would give Laura a path to dignity. I put the receipt on the coffee table without flourish. I said that there were things I didn't understand, and that it wasn't about judgment. It was about safety and honesty. It's a funny thing to say in a living room where your children are within earshot, but that's exactly where these conversations happen, in the places where you usually talk about cleats and science projects. Laura went very still. "I can explain," she said. Marianne sat down hard on the arm of the couch like she'd misjudged the distance. "Explain what?" she asked, the question already rolling into anger. "Don't," Pete said. His voice was so quiet it made all of us lean in. He looked at Laura, not unkind, not avoiding what was obvious on the paper. "Tell the truth. That's the only thing that helps now." Laura looked at me like I'd betrayed her. She looked at her mother like she'd expected a different script. She looked at the kids, at Grace chewing the inside of her lip, at Ethan staring at the rug like a problem needed solving there. Then she folded like someone who'd been carrying a load too long. "I met someone," she said. "He made me feel awake. I know how that sounds." "How did we get to hotels?" Marianne asked. It came out half sob, half supplication, as if there were an alternate story available about a series of misunderstandings. "Laura," Pete said, his voice still even. Laura told it like a woman watching herself in a movie she wished she'd walked out of. The consultant across from my office, the PhD who had come to do a culture workshop with her nonprofit over the winter, the exchange about stress that had led to coffee, then 2 coffees, then a walk, then a day in a hotel to talk without any pressure. She kept using words like permission, as if she had given herself something she'd been denied by a life of being Martha Stewart's understudy. She said she had tried to stop after the first time, but that he had this way of focusing, like a light on a plant you forgot to water. Even she seemed disgusted with the metaphors she was forced to use. She insisted it had nothing to do with me. She said she'd felt invisible and then visible, and that sometimes dirty things felt clean when you told yourself the right story. I don't think of myself as a dramatic person, but hearing your wife describe the way she undid your life in neutral tones makes your brain slam every emotion like keys. I felt a long, cold kind of humiliation that started at my throat and worked down. I thought of the locks on the bridge. I thought of the joke that would sometimes come at the end of a tiring day where I'd say, "Well, aren't we fancy?" and she'd swat my arm. I thought of how, when Grace was born, Laura had lined the hospital bassinet with one of Ethan's old baby blankets because she wanted their scents commingled. "I'm so sorry," she said, but it didn't come from any place that could land. It bounced, a thin apology made thin by the context required to support it. Ethan stood up. For a second I thought he was going to punch a wall because we have made a sport of training our boys to perform emotion with their hands. Instead he said, voice steady, "I'm going to stay with Dad tonight," like it was a plan and not a wound. Grace looked at her mother, at me, back at her mother. "Can I stay with Dad, too?" she whispered, like permission was something she still needed to ask for from the person she'd just learned not to trust. Marianne took a breath I could hear. She put a hand to her chest as if holding something in place. "You'll both stay with Adam," she said, her voice firm like a classroom teacher. "Tonight and for the near future. Until we figure out what is safe." "Mom," Laura said, teenager sarcasm coming from a 41-year-old throat. "Jesus." "Don't," Marianne said sharply. It was the first time in 23 years I'd heard that tone in their house, and it wasn't directed at me. "You lied to your family and put your children in the middle of it. You will not now perform indignation like you're the victim." Pete's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. "You know we love you," he said. "You know that does not change. But I can't imagine the habit of lying this took. And I won't make Adam carry the weight of fixing it by being the one to bridge the house tonight." I tried to say something like gratitude, but the words jammed behind a lump in my throat. Laura's hands worked in her lap like she was turning a phantom ring. Grace sniffled and I did what fathers do, I went to her, even when I wanted to sit on the couch and not move ever again. She tucked herself into my side like she had when she was 5. Ethan stood very straight and looked at me like I was a boat and he was deciding whether it could hold him. "We didn't pack much. Marianne said she'd bring things over in the morning." She hugged me in the driveway with a gentleness that made me want to bolt. Laura stood on the porch, arms crossed, not because she was angry, I know her body, and I knew it wasn't that, but because she'd remembered she might be cold. She didn't cry. I noticed that as we got into the car, that she didn't cry. Some part of me that I'm not proud of wanted the wetness of a scene. The house felt like a stage set when we got home, the kids wandering through in that stunned way people move when they don't know which room they belong in. I told Ethan he could have the guest room for now. "Fresh start," I said, hating myself for the cliché, and Grace dragged her pillow into the living room and insisted on sleeping on the couch. It was a school night. I said it out loud as if that mattered. We brushed teeth. We set out clothes. I wrote to their teachers because that felt like a thing that would at least be received. I copied Laura because I did not want to be accused of making a private war public. When the house finally went quiet, I sat at the table and looked at the bill again. The embossed letterhead shining under the pendant light, the serifed Hargrove that looked like it should belong to a bank. I thought about calling him and then thought about the kind of person who calls the other man and decided I would not be that person. I poured a glass of water and left it on the table like an offering to the god of not saying things you can unsay. The next morning was a marvel only in that it happened. Eggs. Backpacks. The bus. Grace asked if Laura would be at the fall festival and then looked ashamed for asking. Ethan put his hand briefly on my shoulder as he left, a weight and then the absence of a weight. When I got to the office, the hall felt like a funhouse mirror of itself. I heard the roller suitcase wheel over the seam of the carpet next door and flinched. I saw Claire and she looked at me with something like recognition and then pretended she hadn't, which is another sacred small mercy of office life. I closed my door and stared at nothing for 10 minutes and then emailed 3 clients with preposterous focus because the trick to everything is pretending you know what you're doing until your body believes you. At lunch Pete called to say they'd like to come by that evening. He didn't say for what, and I didn't ask. They arrived with Marianne's casserole in a dish that reliably feeds 12. Laura wasn't home. She texted that she was at the doctor, which read as either oblivious provocation or reflex. I felt the hot burst of anger and then let it drain into the sink because the kids were there. At the table, Marianne asked Grace about her campaign slogans. Grace tightened her ponytail and said, "We're trying better snacks and better school spirit," and Marianne clapped her hands like the slogan was a miracle. Ethan ate like a teenage boy, which is to say with the mechanical efficiency of someone showing off an engine. We made a family shape around the missing person. It felt obscene and necessary at the same time. After dinner, when the kids retreated, Grace to FaceTime, Ethan to be horizontal, Marianne folded her napkin into smaller and smaller squares. "We need to talk about next steps," she said to me, then corrected herself, "We need to ask what you need." "I don't know," I said. My voice sounded like I'd borrowed it. I know I'm not a person who can unknow something. I know I can pretend. But I don't want to blow up the kids' lives more than they've already been blown up. "You won't," Pete said. "You can't control how much it explodes, only where you stand when it does." "We'll support whatever you decide," Marianne said. "And we'll hold Laura accountable." The door opened then. Laura stepped inside like a guest might, unsure if she was in the right place. She held a white paper bag from the pharmacy and put it on the counter as if to say, "See? Medicine. Proof." I watched the old muscle memory try to take the stage, the domestic chore, the prop, but none of us could pretend. She looked at Marianne and then at her father and then at me. "I want to talk to the kids," she said. "You can," I said, "but you won't spin them." Her jaw set. "I am not spinning anyone." "You spun me," I said, and immediately regretted the heat in it, how teenage it sounded. Marianne stood, stepped between us with the authority of someone who has broken up 1,000 sibling fights. "Not here," she said. Grace came into the room because children always appear when the words you're trying to keep from them get big. Ethan followed, scanning faces. Laura looked small in front of the people who had loved her longest. She took a breath. "I made a mistake," she said. "A series of them. I hurt Dad. I hurt all of you. I told myself stories about needing things I wasn't getting, and that was selfish. I'm going to take time to figure out what's wrong with me." Grace cried then, not quietly. "Are you leaving?" she asked. Laura looked at me like I held the answer to that question. I realized with a kind of dizzying clarity that I did. "For now," I said, steady. "Mom's going to stay with Nana and Papa. The three of us will be here." Grace looked like she wanted to tear herself in half. She reached for Laura and then for me, an impossible two-handed longing. Ethan stood closer to me than he needed to, his shoulder an accidental bodyguard. Marianne put an arm around Laura's shoulder that was both comfort and censure. Pete's eyes went to the family picture on the wall by habit and then back to us as if reminding himself that the picture was a record of a day, not a prophecy. There are no clean lines. People like to imagine there are, forgiveness on one side, fury on the other, but the truth is more like a braided river that keeps moving no matter how much you sandbag. Laura packed a bag with Marianne hovering like a human guardrail. Grace watched from the stairs, hugging the banister like a friend. Ethan went outside and threw a baseball against the garage door, a thump 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 I could feel in the back of my throat. When the door closed behind Laura, the house exhaled in the way houses do, an adjustment of pressure. I stood in the kitchen and counted to 30 and then counted again because I didn't trust myself to move. The next week became a new map. I made a chart on the fridge like a single dad in a sitcom because sometimes performing competence is the only way to remember you have it. Mondays, Grace's tumbling. Tuesdays, Ethan's lifting. Wednesdays, trash and recycling. We ate a lot of simple food. I learned that if you make a plate of cut-up vegetables and put it on the table while you're cooking, teenagers will eat them without commentary. Marianne dropped off casseroles like it was 1993. Pete drove Ethan to practice and told him stories about the Navy he'd never told before, stories that had edges but ended always with people coming home. I ran into Tom in the hallway at work. He said something about weather being something else and I said it sure was. I wondered if he knew, If anyone in that office knew about doctors and hotels and the polite ways people set fires. I wondered if Dr. Hargrove ever had to introduce himself to his own children in a different tone. I did not want to build my life around hating him because that kind of architecture is ugly no matter how sound the beams are. I wanted to channel my anger into something useful, like showing up on time. One night a week after she left, Laura came by to pick up some of her fall clothes. The kids were home. Grace hovered like a bird that had flown into a window and was stunned but not broken. Ethan was civil to the degree that it could be mistaken for cold. Laura asked if she could talk to them alone, and I said I'd be in the garage if they needed me. I stood between the rakes and the ladder and listened to the sound of their voices. Grace is high, an octave higher than her normal. Laura's careful, all corners patted. Ethan, only once, said something too quiet to catch, and then the silence that follows anything that lands true. She knocked on the garage door on her way out. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Sure," I said, because what else can you say when someone used to be your person? She leaned against the workbench like we were about to discuss whether to put up the storm windows. "I'm seeing a therapist. A real one," she said. "I'm trying to understand how I made this into a story where I was the brave one." "I don't want to be your audience for that," I said. "I meant it as a boundary, not a cruelty, but I know how it landed." She nodded, absorbing it. "I'm sorry," she said again, and this time it sounded less like the empty version and more like the beginning of something that could be offered without an expectation of response. "I don't expect anything from you. I just want to tell the truth when I have it." I nodded. There was a moth batting itself stupid against the garage light. The air smelled like cut grass and oil. In another life I would have reached up to unscrew the bulb to set the moth free. In this one, I watched it tire out and eventually settle on the cinder block wall, quivering and calm. The kids settled faster than I did. Children do that. They are greedy for now. Grace plastered her room with campaign posters and, when she won the election, came flying into the kitchen like a runner breaking a tape. Ethan asked if his friend could sleep over on Friday like nothing fundamental had changed, and the mercy of that, of an ordinary request, made me want to sit down on the floor and weep. When Laura texted about coming to the game, we all negotiated without calling it that. She came, stood with Marianne and Pete, clapped for our son. Afterward, she hugged him and he let himself be hugged like a boy who knows that love is complicated but sturdy. I think people expect the betrayed to become philosophers or poets, to explain what they learned like it's a TED Talk you could condense. The truth is I learned smaller things. I learned which detergent gets grass stains out better. I learned that Grace will talk about her day if you pretend you have no idea what happens in a middle school, and ask questions like a Martian. I learned that Ethan's moods lift if you drive him and his friends to Chipotle and don't say a word, just let the hum of boys be a room they can take with them. I learned to double-check the calendar before agreeing to anything because the person who used to be my backstop wasn't anymore. I also learned that grief is a thing that sneaks. One morning I poured her coffee into the travel mug with the tiny chip on the rim before remembering I was the only one who drank coffee in the house now. I stood at the counter and stared at the mug like it had betrayed me. Another day I found my cap on the top shelf. She must have stuck it there absent-mindedly, like the old tease, and I put it on and felt both ridiculous and safe. The bee was still sweat-faded. It still fit. We sat with the lawyer in October in a room designed to make hard things seem ordinary. Beige chairs. A print of a sailboat so generic it negated the existence of seas. We were civilized, which is to say we both tried not to cry and both failed a little. We talked about schedules and money and health insurance in the house. We said in the best interest of the children like saying it would make us act that way. Laura said she wanted shared custody when we got there, that she was willing to let the kids set the pace of their nights. The lawyer nodded as if he'd heard it all and thought none of it except how to make it into a chart. After, we stood on the sidewalk like people who had finished a class together and didn't know whether to say see you. Laura looked at me and said, "Do you hate me?" I think she needed to hear it. "No," I said, and it was true in a way that surprised me. "I don't hate you. I hate what you chose. Those are different. I have to believe they're different, or else I'd be stuck forever inside a day in September." She nodded and wiped her nose with the back of her hand the way Ethan does. She said she was moving into a small apartment near her parents, that she hoped the kids would visit when they were ready. I said I wasn't going to instruct them one way or another. "I know," she said. "That's why they feel safe with you." That night, Grace and I made a poster for the canned food drive and she drew stars on it like she was decorating a sky from scratch. Ethan asked me if I thought he should go to the winter semi-formal if he got asked, and I said yes even though the thought made me want to put him in a box where all the corners are padded. The house felt itself again, more and less than before. I cleaned the gutters. The cedar shed needles like it's its job. I put on my cap and raked in the wind, the scratch of it in the yard that is exactly ours. When I finally slept deep again, months later, it wasn't because everything was resolved. It was because I had built a routine where the kids knew where to hang their backpacks and we could find the tape and the pencil sharpener without calling out to a ghost. Laura came over one Sunday with a pie in a tin and we ate it and it was fine, the kind of fine that people dismiss but which we know means survivable. She sat on the stoop with Grace and braided her hair, the muscle memory of it a kind of reconciliation that has nothing to do with whether we'd ever be what we were. Ethan asked me if I wanted to go hit grounders, and we did, and I watched the ball thud into his glove and I thought about all the waiting rooms we'd sat in without knowing which kind we were in. The useful ones. The fake ones. The ones we made out of good intention. I thought about how marriage is two people promising not to look away and how sometimes one of them can't keep that promise. I thought about locks on bridges and how sometimes you need to cut them off so the weight doesn't pull the whole thing into the water. When we came back up the driveway, Laura and Grace were laughing about something I couldn't hear, heads tilted toward each other like a mirror. For a second, the whole terrible year didn't matter because this was the thing that did, children whose parents did not make their home a battlefield. Laura looked up and met my eyes and for once she didn't ask for anything with her face. She just nodded, a small acknowledgement like a truce flag, and I nodded back, and we kept moving, all of us, because once you break the story open, the only way to write the next page is to keep showing up. Thank you for listening my story. If you want more raw, real, and gripping stories like this one, subscribe to the AEN Stories channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.